You'll be seated with the business guests, Mrs. Harper. Immediate family is already at the front tables, the wedding coordinator whispered with an uncomfortable smile, as if she hoped I wouldn't make a scene. I stared at the cream-colored seating card in her hand for a moment longer than necessary. Guest number 84. Not grandmother of the bride. Not family. Just guest. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The ballroom inside the Fairmont Chicago glittered like something from an old Hollywood film. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across polished marble floors, while a string quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Servers in black tuxedos floated through the room, carrying silver trays filled with champagne flutes and tiny crab cakes I probably could not pronounce correctly anymore. Everywhere I looked, there were flowers, white roses, orchids, cascading arrangements taller than some of the guests standing beside them. It was beautiful in the kind of way that costs more money than most people would admit out loud, and I had paid for nearly half of it. I adjusted the pearl bracelet on my wrist and smiled politely at the coordinator. I see, I told her softly. She looked relieved immediately. People always looked relieved when older women stayed quiet. At 68, I had learned that the world preferred us graceful and silent, especially at family events where appearances mattered more than feelings. I walked farther into the ballroom, my heels sinking slightly into the thick ivory carpet. Across the room, my granddaughter Chloe stood near the sweetheart table in a custom ivory gown I had quietly helped pay for 6 months earlier. She looked radiant beneath the chandelier light, laughing as photographers circled around her like bees around fresh flowers. For a brief second, my chest tightened with pride. I still remembered the little girl who used to sleep on my chest during thunderstorms because she thought my heartbeat sounded calmer than the rain outside. Back then, she used to call me her favorite person in the world. Funny how weddings change people. Or maybe weddings simply revealed who they already were. Mom. I turned at the sound of Daniel's voice. My son approached quickly, adjusting the sleeve of his tuxedo as if he had somewhere more important to be. At 45, he still carried traces of the shy boy who once cried after accidentally stepping on a bird in our driveway. But lately, whenever I looked at him, all I saw was exhaustion. Exhaustion and avoidance. You made it, he said. I smiled faintly. I was invited, wasn't I? His expression shifted almost imperceptibly before he glanced toward the front tables. Melissa handled most of the seating arrangements, he explained carefully. There were just a lot of logistics. Logistics. Such a clean little word for humiliation. I nodded as though I understood. Of course. He kissed my cheek quickly before disappearing back into the crowd, without asking where I had been seated. I watched him go while a waiter passed carrying champagne. Somewhere behind me, people laughed loudly enough to echo against the ballroom walls. It struck me then how invisible pain could be inside beautiful places. My assigned table sat near the far side of the room beside several corporate clients from Daniel's real estate company. One older gentleman stood politely as I approached. Evelyn Harper, he said warmly. We've heard so much about you. I almost laughed at that. Heard what exactly? That I funded the wedding? That I paid Daniel's mortgage 12 years ago after his business nearly collapsed? That the Harper Family Trust existed because my late husband and I spent 40 years building it one careful investment at a time? Or had they heard something simpler? Something easier? Like old widow. Family obligation. Temporary inconvenience. I sat slowly, smoothing my navy satin dress beneath me. From my table, I had a perfect view of the family section at the front of the ballroom. Melissa sat directly beside Chloe, elegant in a pale gold gown that probably cost more than my first car. Every detail about her looked polished, intentional. Even her smile seemed rehearsed tonight. She leaned toward the photographer and pointed discreetly toward the arrangement of relatives near the stage. A moment later, the photographer began gathering family members together for portraits. Immediate family only, he called cheerfully. I watched as cousins, spouses, siblings, and even Melissa's younger brother stepped into frame. Chloe laughed while Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulder. Then the photographer glanced briefly across the ballroom in my direction before quickly looking away. No one called my name. Not Daniel. Not Chloe. Not even Melissa. I remained seated while camera flashes burst like tiny explosions of light across the ballroom. A strange calm settled over me then. Not anger. Not sadness exactly. Something colder. Something clearer. Because in that moment, sitting alone at table 18 beneath the soft wedding music and golden lights, I finally understood that this had never been an accident. They had not forgotten me. Forgetting is careless. This was deliberate, carefully planned, quietly executed. And somehow, that realization hurt far worse. The wedding planner nearly dropped her clipboard when she recognized me from across the ballroom 20 minutes later. "Mrs. Harper," she said nervously as she approached my table. "There was supposed to be a different floral arrangement here earlier. I am so sorry about the confusion." I looked up from the untouched glass of champagne in front of me. Confusion? She hesitated immediately. Young people often forgot that older women notice hesitation faster than anyone else. We have lived too long not to recognize fear when it slips into someone's voice. "I just meant the seating adjustments," she corrected herself quickly. "These weddings become complicated sometimes." I smiled gently. "I imagine they do." Her eyes drifted toward the family tables again before she leaned slightly closer. "For what it is worth, I thought it was strange." "What was strange?" She swallowed. "Mrs. Melissa was very specific about appearances tonight." I did not answer right away. Instead, I folded my hands carefully in my lap while soft piano music drifted through the ballroom speakers. Around us, guests continued laughing and sipping champagne as if the room itself were floating several inches above reality. "Specific in what way?" I finally asked. The young woman lowered her voice. She said the photographs needed to reflect a modern family image. Those were her exact words. A strange warmth spread across my chest then, but it was not embarrassment anymore. It was clarity. "Modern family image," I repeated softly. She nodded once, clearly regretting she had said anything at all. "I should get back to work," she murmured before quickly disappearing into the crowd. I watched her go while my fingers tightened slightly around the stem of my champagne glass. Modern family image. Such polished language for something so cruel. Across the ballroom, Melissa stood near the cake display speaking to several guests with the effortless confidence of someone who believed she owned every room she entered. Her blonde hair fell perfectly against her shoulders, and the diamonds in her earrings caught the chandelier light every time she turned her head. She looked elegant, successful, untouchable. Most people would have admired her instantly. 12 years ago, I probably would have too. I still remembered the first Thanksgiving she attended after marrying Daniel. She had arrived carrying homemade pecan pies and a bottle of expensive wine, smiling with that same careful warmth she still used in public. "Family means everything to me," she told me while helping arrange silverware on the dining room table. Back then, I believed her. Perhaps that was my mistake. Or perhaps mothers simply want so badly to believe the women their sons marry are kind-hearted that we ignore the small warning signs standing directly in front of us. The first sign had been subtle. Melissa slowly began changing traditions. Sunday dinners disappeared because everyone was too busy. Christmas mornings became private affairs for immediate households only. Birthday celebrations were moved to upscale restaurants where conversations stayed shallow and polished. Every change sounded reasonable on the surface. Healthy boundaries, modern priorities, personal space. Daniel repeated those phrases constantly now, almost like rehearsed lines. Somewhere along the way, our family stopped feeling like family and started feeling like a carefully managed brand. I looked down at the place setting in front of me. Gold-trimmed china, linen napkins folded into roses, tiny printed menus tied with ivory ribbon. The menu alone probably cost more than the groceries my mother used to buy for an entire week when I was growing up in Ohio during the 1960s. My late husband Richard would have found that amusing. Richard believed money should create comfort, not spectacle. He used to say the truly wealthy people were the ones who never needed to prove it. God, I missed him at moments like this. He would have noticed everything immediately. The seating chart, the missing introductions, the way Daniel refused to hold eye contact longer than a few seconds. Richard had always understood people better than I did, especially when it came to manipulation. A burst of laughter pulled me from my thoughts. Near the dance floor, Chloe stood surrounded by bridesmaids holding up her champagne glass, while photographers snapped more pictures. Melissa adjusted the train of Chloe's gown carefully before whispering something into her ear that made both of them laugh again. I studied my granddaughter's face for a long moment. She did not look uncomfortable. She did not look guilty. If anything, she looked relieved. And somehow that realization wounded me more deeply than Melissa's behavior ever could. Because children only become comfortable excluding you after they have been taught that your absence is acceptable. A waiter approached my table carrying dinner plates. "Braised short rib, ma'am," he asked politely. "Thank you." The meat smelled wonderful, but I suddenly realized I was not hungry anymore. Around me, conversations blended together into soft, meaningless noise. Discussions about ski homes in Aspen, summer trips to Napa Valley, private schools, investment properties. Everyone in the ballroom seemed determined to perform happiness for one another. Meanwhile, I sat alone at table 18 staring toward the front of the room where my family laughed beneath crystal chandeliers I had partially paid for. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Beside the sweetheart table stood a large framed portrait display featuring photographs from Chloe's childhood. I could see Daniel holding her as a baby, Melissa at elementary school graduations, family vacations in Florida, Christmas mornings beside matching stockings. There must have been 30 photographs arranged across that display. Not a single one included me. I kept staring at the collage while cold understanding slowly settled over me like winter snow. They were not just removing me from this wedding. They were rewriting the family itself. The first person to speak to me kindly all evening was a man I had never met before. "You must be Evelyn," he said as he lowered himself carefully into the empty chair beside mine. He appeared to be somewhere in his early 70s, tall and silver-haired, wearing a dark charcoal tuxedo with thin reading glasses tucked into his jacket pocket. "I am Walter Bennett," he continued warmly. "I used to work with your late husband years ago." I smiled politely. Richard always spoke highly of his business partners. Walter chuckled softly. "That is generous considering how stubborn we all were back then." His voice carried the kind of calm confidence older men used to have before the world became obsessed with appearing impressive every second of the day. He glanced toward the front tables before lowering his voice slightly. "I hope you do not mind me saying this, but Richard would not have liked what is happening here tonight." My fingers paused against the edge of my napkin. People have been very careful not to say exactly what is happening. Walter gave me a knowing look. That usually means something dishonest is happening. For the first time all evening, I almost laughed. Just a small one. Barely enough to feel, but enough to remind me I was still capable of it. Across the ballroom, the wedding party began moving toward the dance floor while soft jazz replaced the string quartet. Chloe and her new husband, Ethan, swayed beneath warm amber lights while guests applauded politely around them. They looked beautiful together, young, untouched by disappointment. Watching them should have made me emotional in the way grandmothers are expected to become at weddings. Instead, I felt strangely detached, like I was observing someone else's family from behind glass. Walter followed my gaze. "How long were you married?" he asked gently. 43 years, I answered. Richard proposed to me at a diner outside Milwaukee during a snowstorm because his car broke down. Walter smiled faintly. "That sounds like a real marriage." It was not glamorous, I admitted, but it was honest. The word lingered between us for a moment longer than expected. Honest. I realized then how little honesty existed inside the ballroom tonight. Every smile felt curated. Every conversation polished. Even the wedding itself suddenly seemed less like a celebration and more like a performance carefully designed for photographs and social media captions. Melissa excelled at things like that. She understood image better than anyone I had ever known. Years ago, after Daniel's company recovered financially, Melissa hired a branding consultant for his real estate business. She redesigned the logo, rebuilt the website, changed the office furniture, even coached Daniel on how to speak during investor meetings. "People buy confidence," she told him constantly. At first, her ambition impressed me. Later, I began noticing that she treated people the same way she treated branding strategies. Useful things stayed. Complicated things disappeared quietly. My gaze drifted once more toward the massive photograph display near the sweetheart table. The absence of my face in those family memories now felt intentional in a way that almost fascinated me. Someone had sorted through decades of photographs and deliberately removed every image containing me. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school graduations, beach vacations, entire chapters of family history quietly erased. That kind of editing required planning, time, coordination. "Mrs. Harper?" A young voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see one of the bridesmaids standing beside the table, nervously adjusting the strap of her pale blue dress. Chloe wanted me to let everyone know the family speeches are starting soon. Everyone. Such a funny word when people only mean certain people. Walter stood. Politely. I suppose we should watch the show, he murmured. Guests gradually returned to their seats while waiters cleared dessert plates and refreshed wine glasses. At the front of the ballroom, Melissa stepped onto the small stage near the dance floor holding a microphone in one hand and a champagne flute in the other. She looked perfectly composed beneath the chandelier light. Good evening, everyone, she began smoothly. Tonight is not just about celebrating Chloe and Ethan. It is about celebrating the future. Applause echoed softly through the ballroom. Melissa smiled graciously before continuing. Watching Chloe build this beautiful new chapter reminds me how important it is to surround ourselves with people who encourage growth, success, and forward movement in life. I noticed Walter glance sideways at me, then quickly look away again. Melissa continued speaking with effortless elegance. Families evolve over time. Traditions evolve. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give the next generation is the freedom to step into something even better. Several guests nodded approvingly as though she were delivering profound wisdom instead of carefully packaged cruelty. My chest felt strangely hollow listening to her. Not because the words hurt. Hurt would have implied surprise. But because I suddenly understood the deeper truth beneath everything happening tonight. Melissa did not merely want distance from me. She wanted replacement. A newer version of the Harper family. Younger, sleeker, easier to display publicly. One without aging parents, old grief, messy loyalty, or inconvenient history attached to it. A family with polished photographs and elegant parties, but no memory of the people who built the foundation beneath it. And of course, Melissa continued with a bright smile, none of tonight would have been possible without Chloe's incredible parents. The ballroom applauded loudly while Daniel rose awkwardly beside her. Melissa leaned over and kissed his cheek for the cameras. I watched my son force a smile beneath the spotlight, while something inside me settled with sudden terrifying calm. Because for the first time all evening, I no longer felt excluded. I felt warned. And there is a difference between being forgotten and being deliberately removed before something larger happens next. After the speeches ended, guests rose from their seats and drifted back toward the dance floor while servers rolled out silver carts filled with miniature desserts and coffee service. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, casting everything in a soft amber glow that made the entire evening feel unreal, like one of those luxury hotel advertisements where nobody ever sweats or argues or grows old. Walter excused himself to speak with someone near the bar, leaving me alone once again at table 18. I watched Melissa move gracefully through the crowd, touching elbows lightly, smiling for photographs, greeting investors and distant relatives with the same polished warmth. She belonged in rooms like this. Or at least she knew how to appear as though she did. There is a difference. My phone vibrated quietly beside my plate. For a moment, I assumed it was another automated bank notification or perhaps one of my bridge club friends asking how the wedding was going. Instead, the screen displayed a name I had not seen in nearly 8 months. Harold Whitmore, Richard's former accountant. My stomach tightened slightly. Harold almost never called after 9 o'clock at night unless something was important. I answered softly. Harold, Evelyn, he said quickly, his voice tense beneath the ballroom music echoing through my phone speaker. I hope I am not interrupting. I am at the wedding reception. A brief silence followed. Then I suspect my timing may actually be fortunate. I sat a little straighter in my chair. What is wrong? Harold lowered his voice. I received paperwork requests from Daniel's office 3 weeks ago regarding portions of the Harper Trust. My fingers tightened instinctively around the phone. What kind of requests? Asset restructuring, transfer discussions, property evaluations. I stared toward the dance floor where Daniel now stood beside Melissa while photographers gathered guests for another series of pictures. Daniel never mentioned any restructuring to me. That is because the requests were preliminary, Harold replied carefully. Nothing official required your signature yet. Yet, such a dangerous little word. Harold, I said quietly, tell me exactly what is happening. He exhaled slowly before speaking again. Melissa contacted our office several times over the past month asking detailed questions about liquidity options involving the family trust after the wedding. The ballroom suddenly felt much colder despite the crowded room. Liquidity options, I repeated. That sounds like banker language for selling things. In many cases, it is. I looked toward the massive windows overlooking downtown Chicago where snow drifted softly through the dark sky beyond the glass. Richard spent 43 years building that trust carefully. Apartment buildings, commercial properties, long-term investments, not flashy wealth, stable wealth, generational wealth, everything designed to protect the family long after we were gone. What exactly are they trying to sell? I asked. Harold hesitated again. The Michigan Lake property was discussed. So were portions of the downtown commercial holdings. For a moment, I could not speak at all. The lake house, Richard's favorite place in the world. The same cedar home where Daniel learned to fish at age 7 and Chloe spent entire summers chasing fireflies along the dock while Richard grilled hamburgers nearby. My late husband used to sit on the back porch every evening watching the sun disappear across Lake Michigan with a cup of black coffee balanced between his hands. Richard wanted that property protected. I whispered. I know, Harold replied gently. That is why I am calling. I closed my eyes briefly while laughter erupted somewhere near the dance floor. The contrast between the cheerful wedding atmosphere and the cold realization settling inside my chest felt almost surreal. There is more, Evelyn, Harold continued carefully. Melissa also requested copies of the trust succession language. I understood immediately. Succession language determined control after my death. Not inheritance, control. And my voice sounded strangely calm, even to myself. She specifically asked under what conditions Daniel could assume full authority without additional family oversight. I opened my eyes slowly and looked across the ballroom toward my son. At that exact moment, Daniel glanced in my direction. For one brief second, our eyes met across the crowded room. Then he looked away first, just like he always did now. Something settled into place inside me then. Not heartbreak. That had already happened gradually over years of small exclusions and careful emotional distance. No, this felt different. Clearer. Like finally seeing the full shape of a storm after watching dark clouds gather for months. Harold, I asked quietly, do you believe Daniel understands what Melissa is doing? The accountant was silent for several seconds. I believe your son has convinced himself that modernization and betrayal are the same thing. The words landed harder than anything else I had heard all evening. Because deep down, I knew Harold was right. Daniel probably told himself they were making practical financial decisions. Streamlining assets. Simplifying structures. Moving forward. That was the language people used when they wanted to destroy history without feeling guilty about it. Thank you for calling me, I finally said softly. You should review the trust documents again, Harold warned gently. Soon. After we ended the call, I remained perfectly still in my chair while the wedding reception continued around me in glittering slow motion. Waiters poured more champagne. Music floated through the ballroom. Guests laughed beneath crystal chandeliers, while photographers captured smiling faces that would later appear in silver frames and holiday cards. Meanwhile, I sat alone holding my phone in trembling fingers as the final pieces quietly locked together inside my mind. The seating chart, the missing photographs, the speeches about the future, the careful removal of my presence from family memories. None of this was about embarrassment. None of it was accidental. They were preparing the room emotionally before taking control financially. And suddenly, for the first time all evening, I understood exactly why Melissa had worked so hard to make me feel invisible tonight. People rarely notice when someone disappears after they have already been taught not to see them. For several minutes after the phone call ended, I remained seated without moving while the wedding reception carried on around me as though nothing in the world had shifted. Somewhere near the dance floor, guests applauded as Chloe tossed her bouquet into a crowd of laughing bridesmaids. Camera flashes burst across the ballroom in quick bursts of white light, while servers refreshed wine glasses and cleared dessert plates with practiced elegance. It amazed me how ordinary betrayal could look from the outside. There were no raised voices, no shattered dishes, no dramatic confrontations beneath the chandeliers. Just soft music, polished smiles, and the quiet understanding that I was being carefully removed from my own family before the final paperwork began. I slowly placed my phone back inside my evening purse and looked down at my hands resting in my lap. Richard used to hold those same hands across our kitchen table every Sunday morning while we reviewed finances together over coffee and blueberry muffins. Money tells you who people really are, he would always say. Not because money changes them, because eventually it gives them the confidence to stop pretending. At the time, I thought he sounded cynical. Now I wondered if he had simply lived long enough to recognize patterns I was too sentimental to see. Mrs. Harper? I looked up to find Ethan standing beside my table. Chloe's new husband looked uncomfortable in the way decent men often do when they accidentally walk into emotional situations they do not fully understand. He adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo nervously before speaking again. Do you mind if I sit for a moment? Of course not. He lowered himself carefully into the empty chair across from me, while glancing briefly toward the dance floor, where Chloe posed for more photographs beside Melissa and Daniel. I wanted to thank you personally for everything you did for the wedding, he said quietly. Chloe told me you helped more than anyone. I studied his expression carefully. Unlike most people in the ballroom tonight, Ethan still seemed capable of discomfort. That alone made me trust him slightly more. You are welcome, I answered softly. You love my granddaughter. That matters to me. He hesitated before leaning closer. I hope this is not inappropriate to say, but something feels strange tonight. I almost smiled. That makes two of us. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I noticed your table assignment earlier, and the photo situation. His voice lowered further. Honestly, it did not sit right with me. Across the ballroom, Melissa laughed brightly while speaking to several guests near the bar. Even from a distance, I could feel her controlling the energy of the room the same way conductors control orchestras. Every interaction moved according to her rhythm. Every person positioned exactly where she wanted them. Chloe says her mother gets intense during events. Ethan continued carefully. But tonight feels different somehow. Different. Such a polite word for calculated humiliation. How long have you known Chloe? I asked. Almost 4 years. Then you probably still believe families are honest with each other. He gave a small, uncertain laugh. I guess I would like to. I looked toward the giant windows overlooking downtown Chicago where snow continued drifting through the darkness outside. I used to believe that too, I admitted quietly. Ethan followed my gaze for a moment before speaking again. There is something else I probably should tell you. My attention returned to him immediately. During rehearsal dinner yesterday, Melissa kept talking about how important it was for Chloe and me to start fresh after the wedding. My chest tightened slightly. Fresh. She said younger couples need freedom from old expectations and emotional obligations. He frowned faintly. At the time, I thought she just meant normal marriage advice. But now, he glanced toward my isolated table and stopped speaking. I understood the rest without needing him to finish. Melissa was not simply organizing a wedding. She was restructuring emotional loyalties before restructuring financial ones. Slowly, strategically, publicly. Did Chloe agree with her? I asked carefully. Ethan looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Chloe mostly stayed quiet. That answer hurt more than I expected. Silence can become its own form of betrayal after a certain point, especially from people you once helped raise. I still remembered sitting beside Chloe's hospital bed when she was 9 years old after her appendix surgery. Melissa had been away on a business conference in Scottsdale, and Daniel panicked around hospitals. So I stayed 3 nights sleeping upright in an uncomfortable vinyl chair beside my granddaughter, while cartoon reruns played quietly on the television at 2 in the morning. Chloe used to grip my hand every time a nurse entered the room because she was afraid of needles. Grandma stays, she whispered repeatedly whenever doctors suggested I go home and rest. Back then, my presence made her feel safe. Tonight, my presence felt inconvenient. Mrs. Harper? Ethan's voice pulled me back gently. Can I ask you something honestly? You may try. He hesitated. Why have you stayed so calm tonight? I looked at him carefully for several seconds before answering. Because loud pain is easy for people to dismiss. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly again as slow music filled the room. Couples drifted back toward the dance floor while conversations softened into low, elegant murmurs. Ethan remained silent beside me, absorbing my words carefully. Then suddenly, across the ballroom, I noticed something that made my heartbeat slow instead of quicken. Near the entrance stood a tall man in a dark overcoat speaking quietly with hotel staff while carrying a slim leather briefcase in one hand. Even from a distance, I recognized him instantly. Arthur Coleman, the Harper family attorney. And based on the expression on his face, He had not arrived at the wedding by accident. Arthur Coleman had aged noticeably since the last time I saw him in person. His once dark hair was now almost entirely silver, and deep lines framed his mouth in a way that suggested years spent managing other people's secrets. Still, he carried himself with the same calm precision Richard always admired in attorneys. Arthur noticed me almost immediately from across the ballroom. His expression shifted subtly when he saw where I was seated. Not at the family tables, not near the stage, alone beside corporate guests and strangers. He understood everything within seconds. Good attorneys usually do. "Mrs. Harper," Ethan said carefully beside me, following my gaze toward the entrance. "Do you know him?" "Very well," I answered quietly. Arthur excused himself from the hotel staff and walked steadily across the ballroom floor toward my table. As he passed several guests, I noticed Melissa suddenly stiffen near the dance floor. Her smile did not disappear completely, but something colder slipped briefly behind it. Daniel followed her line of sight a moment later. The color drained slightly from his face when he recognized the attorney. "Interesting," I thought. "Very interesting." "Evelyn," Arthur said warmly as he reached the table. "You look lovely this evening." "And you look expensive," I replied softly. For the first time all night, someone laughed without performance attached to it. Arthur shook Ethan's hand politely before turning back toward me. "May I borrow you for a moment?" he asked. "Of course." I rose slowly from my chair, smoothing the front of my navy satin dress, while Ethan stepped aside respectfully. The ballroom music faded slightly behind us as Arthur guided me toward a quieter hallway just outside the reception room. Thick cream-colored carpeting muffled our footsteps while hotel sconces cast soft golden light across the walls. Away from the music and smiling guests, the silence suddenly felt enormous. Arthur waited until we reached a secluded seating area near the elevators before speaking again. "Harold called me an hour ago," he said carefully. He was concerned. "So am I." Arthur studied my face closely. "How much have you figured out on your own tonight?" I looked back toward the ballroom entrance where laughter and music still drifted faintly into the hallway. "Enough to understand that this wedding is not really about Chloe." He nodded slowly. "Richard worried this might happen one day." My chest tightened slightly at the mention of my husband. Even after 3 years, hearing his name unexpectedly still felt like touching a bruise beneath the skin. "He saw it before I did," I admitted quietly. Arthur removed his glasses and rubbed them slowly with a folded handkerchief. "Richard updated several portions of the family trust 6 months before his death." I stared at him carefully. "Updated in what way?" "Protective provisions." Arthur's voice remained calm and measured. "Specifically regarding control of family assets if coercion or financial manipulation became concerns." The hallway suddenly felt colder. "You mean Melissa?" Arthur did not answer directly. Attorneys rarely do. Richard believed family wealth should preserve stability, not reward opportunism. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Down the hallway, a hotel employee pushed a cart of folded table linens toward the service elevator while muffled wedding music echoed softly through the walls. The entire hotel continued functioning normally while my understanding of my own family shifted piece by piece beneath me. "There is more," Arthur continued gently. 3 weeks ago, Daniel requested an informal review of succession procedures. Without telling me. "Yes." I closed my eyes briefly. Somewhere deep inside me, another quiet piece of grief settled into place. Not shock anymore. Recognition. "And Melissa?" I asked. Arthur hesitated slightly. "Melissa attended both meetings." "Of course she did." I leaned back slowly against the velvet chair behind me while memories rearranged themselves in my mind with painful clarity. Melissa encouraging Daniel to simplify paperwork after Richard's funeral. Her sudden interest in investment strategies. The repeated comments about downsizing unnecessary family properties. Even tonight's speeches about the future suddenly sounded less emotional and far more strategic. "They think I am weak," I said quietly. Arthur looked at me carefully before answering. "No, they think you are grieving. There is a difference." The words landed heavily because they were true. Grief softens people. It makes them tired, distracted, easier to pressure into signing documents simply to avoid conflict. Melissa had probably spent years learning exactly how emotional exhaustion changes decision-making inside families. Richard anticipated this possibility. Arthur said gently, "That is why he left additional instructions." My eyes lifted sharply toward him. Arthur opened the slim leather briefcase he carried and removed a sealed ivory envelope with my name written across the front in Richard's handwriting. The sight of it nearly stole my breath. I knew that handwriting better than my own. Steady, precise, familiar enough to once feel like home itself. He instructed me to give you this only if you ever began questioning whether the family trust was being respected properly. My fingers trembled slightly as I accepted the envelope. For a moment, I could not open it. I simply stared at Richard's handwriting beneath the warm hotel lights while years of marriage pressed painfully against my chest. Finally, I slid one finger beneath the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. The letter was short, very short. Richard always believed the most important truths required the fewest words. Evelyn, if you are reading this, then someone has mistaken your kindness for weakness. Do not protect people who are already planning to erase you. Remember what belongs to you. And remember who built it with you. I read the note twice before folding it carefully back into the envelope. When I finally looked up again, something inside me had changed quietly and completely. Arthur noticed immediately. I thought you should have that before tonight goes any further, he said softly. Through the ballroom doors, applause suddenly erupted again as guests cheered for something happening near the dance floor. Arthur glanced toward the sound before looking back at me one final time. Evelyn, he said carefully. If Melissa and Daniel proceed the way I believe they intend to, there will come a moment very soon when everyone in that ballroom expects you to stay silent. I smoothed Richard's letter gently between my fingers before placing it back inside my purse. Then I lifted my eyes toward the glowing reception hall where my family celebrated beneath crystal chandeliers and expensive flowers purchased partly with my own money. That, I said quietly, would be their first serious mistake. When Arthur and I returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted into that softer stage weddings always reach near the end of the evening. Jackets were draped over chairs. Champagne glasses stood half-empty beside melting candlelight. Older relatives sat near the edges of the room rubbing tired feet, while younger guests crowded the dance floor beneath rotating amber lights. From a distance, it looked warm, intimate, perfect. Melissa noticed me the second I stepped back inside. Her eyes moved immediately from my face to Arthur walking beside me, and for the first time all night, I saw something crack through her polished composure. Fear, just for a second, but enough. Daniel turned moments later and stiffened visibly when Arthur nodded politely in his direction. My son tried to recover quickly, forcing another social smile for the nearby guests, but he kept adjusting his cufflinks afterward with nervous, repetitive movements I recognized from his childhood. Daniel always touched his sleeves when he was anxious. He did it before math exams in middle school. He did it before giving speeches in college. And now, apparently, he did it when family secrets began slipping out of his control. Mrs. Harper, the wedding coordinator, approached nervously once more, clutching her clipboard against her chest. The bride and groom are about to do their final thank you toast. I smiled faintly. How lovely. She hesitated before lowering her voice. Mrs. Melissa asked that only immediate family remain near the stage during the toast. There it was again. Immediate family. Such clean, elegant language for exclusion. Of course she did. Arthur murmured quietly beside me. The coordinator looked deeply uncomfortable now, as though she finally understood she had spent the entire evening participating in something ugly disguised as sophistication. Would you still like me to reserve your car afterward? She asked gently. No, I answered calmly. I think I will stay a little longer. Across the ballroom, guests slowly gathered near the stage while Chloe and Ethan stood smiling beneath soft chandelier light. Melissa moved gracefully toward the microphone stand, one hand resting lightly against Daniel's arm as photographers positioned themselves nearby. Every detail was carefully arranged for appearances, every face angled toward the cameras, every emotion polished before display. Arthur leaned slightly closer to me. The revised trust documents are already finalized, he said quietly. Nothing Daniel requested can proceed without your direct authorization. I nodded once. Good. You also still maintain full discretionary authority over all family distributions. I looked toward the stage thoughtfully. Including wedding reimbursements? Arthur almost smiled. Especially wedding reimbursements. A strange calm settled over me then. Not triumph. Not revenge. Simply clarity. Richard used to say clarity was one of the few real luxuries age provides. Young people mistake emotion for truth because they have not lived long enough to separate the two. But eventually, after enough disappointment, enough betrayal, enough carefully hidden selfishness, you begin seeing people exactly as they are instead of who you hoped they might become. Melissa tapped the microphone gently, drawing the ballroom quiet. Before everyone leaves tonight, she began warmly. Daniel and I wanted to say one final thank you to the people who helped make this beautiful evening possible. Guests applauded politely. Chloe smiled beside her mother while Ethan remained noticeably quieter than before. Melissa continued speaking with perfect elegance. Watching our daughter begin this new chapter has reminded us how important family support truly is. Family support. The words almost made me laugh aloud. And while Ethan and Chloe now begin building their own future together, we know they will continue creating a life filled with ambition, growth, and modern values. Modern values again. Always modern values. Melissa loved phrases that sounded inspirational while meaning absolutely nothing. Around the ballroom, guests nodded approvingly. Wealthy people especially enjoy speeches that make selfishness sound sophisticated. Then Melissa smiled brightly and delivered the sentence she clearly believed would complete her carefully designed evening. And now that a new generation is stepping forward, she said smoothly, it is time for older generations to finally relax and let go gracefully. Several guests laughed softly. Daniel smiled beside her, though it looked strained around the edges. Chloe shifted slightly uncomfortably, but nobody objected. Nobody said a word. Because cruelty delivered with champagne and soft lighting often passes for wisdom in rooms like this. I felt Arthur glance toward me carefully, waiting to see whether I would stay silent exactly as Melissa expected. Across the ballroom, I noticed Ethan watching me too now, his expression tense and uncertain. Even Walter Bennett had stopped speaking mid-conversation near the bar. Somehow the entire room seemed to pause without realizing it. I reached slowly into my evening purse and touched Richard's folded letter once more. Do not protect people who are already planning to erase you. The words settled firmly inside my chest. Then Melissa lifted her champagne glass with a polished smile and added one final sentence. Tonight belongs to the future. Something inside me became perfectly still. I rose slowly from table 18, smoothing the front of my navy satin dress, while dozens of conversations around the ballroom gradually faded into silence. Melissa's smile faltered almost immediately. Daniel went pale. Arthur stepped quietly aside. Without hurrying, without anger, without raising my voice even slightly, I began walking toward the stage beneath the crystal chandeliers, while every pair of eyes in the ballroom slowly turned to follow me. And for the first time all evening, nobody tried to stop me. The ballroom became so quiet that I could hear the faint clink of ice settling inside champagne glasses as I crossed the floor toward the stage. Hundreds of tiny crystal reflections shimmered overhead while guests slowly stepped aside to let me pass. No one spoke. No one moved. Melissa remained frozen beside the microphone with her smile half-formed, as though her face had not yet decided which emotion it should wear next. Daniel looked worse. Pale. Unsteady. Like a man suddenly realizing a private conversation had become public. I climbed the small staircase to the stage carefully, one hand lightly touching the railing. While my heels clicked softly against polished wood, the microphone stood only a few feet away now beside the towering floral arrangements I had partially paid for. White orchids. Imported roses. Thousands of dollars in flowers designed to impress people who would forget them by morning. Melissa recovered first. She always did. Evelyn, she said smoothly into the silence, her voice wrapped in practiced warmth. Were you wanting to say a few words to Chloe and Ethan? I looked directly at her for several seconds before answering. Actually, I said calmly, I believe there are a few things everyone here should hear. A ripple of discomfort moved quietly through the ballroom. Melissa's fingers tightened slightly around her champagne glass. Daniel stared at the floor. Chloe looked confused more than anything else. Young people often mistake tension for temporary awkwardness because they have not yet lived long enough to recognize betrayal unfolding in real time. I accepted the microphone gently from Melissa's hand. She hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before releasing it. Even now, standing inches away from me beneath the chandelier lights, she still believed she controlled the room. That was the remarkable thing about manipulative people. They confuse silence with victory. I turned slowly toward the guests filling the ballroom. Investors, family friends, relatives, business associates, people dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns who expected another sentimental wedding speech before valet service and expensive hotel suites upstairs. Instead, they got me. "Good evening," I began softly. My voice carried clearly through the silent ballroom. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Evelyn Harper." I paused briefly. Although tonight, I believe I was officially listed as guest number 84. Several uncomfortable glances moved through the crowd immediately. Somewhere near the back of the room, someone coughed awkwardly into a napkin. Melissa's smile disappeared completely. "I have spent most of tonight quietly observing something very interesting," I continued calmly. "Not the flowers, not the music, not the beautiful wedding itself, but the careful way people can erase someone while pretending to be polite about it." Daniel finally looked up then. "Mom," he said softly, warningly. I lifted one hand slightly without looking at him. "No, Daniel. Let me finish." My voice never rose. It did not need to. Quiet disappointment often commands more attention than anger ever could. "You see, there is something guests here may not realize tonight," I continued. "This wedding was not built by one generation alone." I glanced briefly toward Chloe. Long before these chandeliers, before the ballroom reservations, before the imported flowers and custom invitations, there was a man named Richard Harper. The room grew still again at my late husband's name. Richard spent 43 years building a life centered around family. Not image, not status. Family. Arthur stood silently near the back of the ballroom now, watching everything carefully. When Daniel's business nearly collapsed 12 years ago during the recession, Richard and I used our retirement savings to keep the company alive. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. When Chloe wanted to attend Northwestern without student loans, Richard and I funded her education quietly because we believed young people should begin adulthood with opportunity instead of debt. Chloe's face shifted visibly then, confusion turning slowly toward realization. "And when this wedding required additional funding 6 months ago," I said calmly, "I provided it happily because I loved my granddaughter and wanted tonight to feel special for her." A murmur spread softly through the guests now. Melissa stepped forward quickly beside me. "Evelyn, this really is not the appropriate moment for financial discussions." I turned toward her slowly. "No." My tone remained gentle. "Interesting. Because apparently tonight was considered the perfect moment to publicly discuss older generations stepping aside. Several people looked down into their champagne glasses after that." Melissa's composure cracked further around the edges. "That was not what I meant," she replied tightly. "I think everyone here understood exactly what you meant." Silence again. Heavy now. Unavoidable. I reached calmly into my evening purse and removed Richard's folded letter along with a second envelope Arthur had handed me moments earlier in the hallway. Thick ivory paper. Legal documents inside. Melissa's eyes locked immediately onto the envelope. Fear flashed across her face so quickly most people probably missed it. I did not. "You spent a great deal of effort tonight trying to make me feel unnecessary," I said quietly while looking directly at Melissa and Daniel together now. "But what neither of you understood is that Richard planned very carefully for the possibility that someone might eventually mistake kindness for weakness." Daniel went completely pale. "Mom." "No," I interrupted softly. "You should listen now." I lifted the envelope slightly in my hand. 3 weeks ago, while planning this beautiful celebration about family values and new beginnings, the two of you were also quietly exploring ways to restructure the Harper Trust after my death. Gasps moved audibly through the ballroom. Chloe stared at her parents in stunned disbelief. Ethan looked physically ill. Melissa recovered just enough to speak. "That is absolutely inappropriate private business." "Then perhaps," I replied calmly, "you should have handled it privately instead of beginning those conversations before I was even finished grieving my husband." The silence afterward felt enormous. No one moved after I finished speaking. The ballroom stood suspended in complete silence beneath the chandeliers, while every carefully polished part of the evening cracked open at once. Melissa looked as though she had forgotten how to breathe properly. Daniel stared at me with an expression I had not seen on his face since childhood, the stunned realization that consequences had finally arrived. Chloe remained frozen beside Ethan, one hand covering her mouth while tears gathered slowly in her eyes. I looked at my granddaughter for a long moment before speaking again. Chloe, I said gently, this is not your fault. Her voice shook when she answered. Grandma, I did not know. And strangely enough, I believed her. Not completely innocent perhaps, not entirely unaware. But young people raised around manipulation often learn to normalize cruelty before they understand what they are participating in. Melissa stepped forward quickly then, desperation finally slipping through her polished composure. Evelyn, this has gone far enough. I turned toward her calmly. Actually, Melissa, it has finally gone far enough. A murmur passed through several guests near the front tables. Arthur remained quietly near the ballroom entrance, watching without interruption. I unfolded the second document in my hand carefully while the room waited. Earlier this evening, I continued softly. Arthur Coleman finalized revisions to the Harper family trust according to instructions Richard left before his death. Daniel's face drained completely of color. Mom, please. The Michigan Lake House, I said clearly, along with all protected family properties, can no longer be sold, leveraged, or transferred through discretionary restructuring. Melissa's eyes widened instantly. What? Her voice came out sharper than intended. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Additionally, I continued, all future authority over the Harper Trust will now require unanimous oversight from an independent board rather than direct family control. Daniel looked physically unsteady now. You changed the trust? No, I answered calmly. Your father did. I simply decided tonight to finally enforce the protections he already prepared. Melissa stepped toward me again, lowering her voice urgently. You are humiliating us in front of everyone. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was amusing, because it revealed everything. No, Melissa, I said quietly. Humiliation is being seated as a stranger at your own granddaughter's wedding after helping build the family everyone here is celebrating. The silence after that felt almost sacred. Heavy, honest, necessary. Chloe began crying softly now, while Ethan wrapped one arm protectively around her shoulders. Grandma, she whispered, I swear I did not know about the trust meetings. I looked at her carefully. I know. And again, I meant it. Melissa opened her mouth to speak again, but Daniel finally interrupted her. Stop. His voice sounded hollow. Tired. He looked at me with tears gathering in his eyes for the first time all evening. Mom, I never wanted to hurt you. The strange thing about betrayal is that sometimes people believe hurting you quietly somehow hurts less. They convince themselves that polite exclusion is kinder than direct cruelty, that avoiding difficult conversations excuses the damage afterward. But pain does not become smaller simply because it arrives wrapped in expensive language. I studied my son beneath the ballroom lights and suddenly saw every version of him at once. The little boy afraid of thunderstorms. The nervous teenager practicing speeches at our kitchen table. The exhausted young father struggling financially after the recession. And now this man standing beside a woman who had slowly convinced him that loyalty to his own mother was somehow outdated. I believe you, I told him softly. That is what makes this so sad. Tears slipped down Chloe's face now openly. Around the ballroom, guests avoided eye contact while pretending to focus on champagne glasses and centerpiece flowers. Nobody knew where to look anymore. The performance had ended. Only truth remained. I folded the documents carefully and handed them back to Arthur, who stepped forward quietly to receive them. There is one more thing, I said softly before anyone could speak again. Every eye lifted toward me once more. I looked directly at Chloe. Your grandfather created a separate educational foundation years ago. It was always meant to support future Harper children and local scholarships in Chicago after my passing. Chloe blinked in confusion. I did not know that. Very few people did. I glanced briefly toward Melissa and Daniel. I have decided tonight to move the majority of my discretionary estate into that foundation permanently. Melissa went completely still. Daniel closed his eyes. That means, I continued calmly, the Harper legacy will belong to students, families, and future generations who understand gratitude rather than entitlement. No one spoke after that. Not even Melissa. Especially not Melissa. Because deep down, she understood exactly what had happened. She had spent years trying to remove me, quietly from the family narrative so she could eventually control the family future. Instead, she had exposed herself publicly before losing the very power she thought she was securing. I handed the microphone back onto its stand gently before smoothing the front of my navy dress one final time. I truly do hope the two of you have a beautiful marriage, I told Chloe and Ethan sincerely. But remember this. The people who help build your life should never become invisible once the photographs are taken. Chloe broke down crying completely after that. Ethan held her tightly, while Daniel stood motionless beneath the chandelier light looking older than I had ever seen him. I turned away quietly before anyone could stop me. The ballroom remained silent as I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking softly across marble floors beneath thousands of dollars in flowers and crystal light. Outside the hotel, snow drifted gently through the cold Chicago air while a valet hurried to open the door of my car. I paused for just a moment before getting inside and looked back through the towering ballroom windows glowing against the night. Somewhere in there, my family was still standing among the ruins of an evening built entirely on appearances. But for the first time in years, I no longer felt erased. I felt free.